Joining us now, Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, I don't know how much rest you've gotten, but let's dive in because you got a deal and now you got to sell it to members. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those who are upset. Congressman Dan Bishop, Chad talked about him. He tweeted this after the call you had with the group last night. Heard the call. Rhinos congratulating McCarthy for getting almost Zippo in exchange for $4 trillion debt ceiling hike was enough to make you. And he used the vomit emoji. Actually, it's so bad they won't give a figure for the debt ceiling hike, only that it's suspended till first quarter of 2025. Our bill was a year less. Your reaction? He's probably a no vote.
Well, that's okay, because more than 95% of all those in the conference were very excited. But think about this. We finally were able to cut spending. We're the first Congress to vote for cutting spending year over year. So you cut that back. You fully fund the veterans, you fully fund defense, but you take that non-defense spending all the way back lower than 22 levels. Now you get work requirements for TANF and SNAP, where the Democrats said that was a red line. Now you're able to reform NEPA. How frustrating we are with, it's been 40 years since you could streamline it. To build a road in America takes you 7 years of review. We now limit that where it's focused, where you can only review it for 1 to 2 years. We're going to get America working again. We get the process working again, where we always have these omnibuses at the end of the year. We now penalize Congress if they don't get their jobs done. There is so much in this that's positive, and measure it to all the other debt ceilings. When Republicans had the presidency, the Senate, and the House, did they ever cut spending? No, they increased it. We were able to do this when the president said he wasn't even going to talk to us. This is really a step in the right direction. It puts us a trajectory that's different. We put a statutory cap on only spending 1% for the next 6 years. So we let government grow, but at a slower rate.
So let's put it at that point. There's a lot there, but on that issue of spending, the White House is sending around its side. And of course, they're going to take credit too and want a victory lap. They say this: there are no budget caps after 2025, only non-enforceable appropriations targets. We all know how non-enforceable targets work in Washington. So they say you might have gotten something for a year or two, but after that, there's nothing to it.
No, first of all, watch what the government has done before. They increased it.
Okay, but are they not telling us the truth there?
No, you have a statutory cap on there. We've got to be able to stay in the majority. Then we could have a rule to be able to keep it going forward. The other thing you have here, too, is for the very first time, you have administrative pay-go. We had a president that spent another $1.5 trillion around Congress. That can no longer happen.
Meaning if he takes executive actions.
I'm sorry, what?
Meaning if he takes executive actions, he's got
to cut to be able to go forward.
Talk about where he's going to pay for it.
He doesn't have to talk about it. He has to do it. That would have saved us $1.5 trillion in the first 2 years of this presidency. That's a major savings. That has never been in law before, and now it's being put into law. If you look at each movement here, this is a whole new direction. Just think about how this even came to fruition. Normally, you have a 1,000-page bill. This is going to be less than 150 pages. Normally, the country doesn't know about it till after it's passed. No, we'll wait 72 hours. This is worthy of the American people. I want them to read it. I want them to understand it. We only have the majority in one House with a 5-seat majority, with a president who said we would never talk about this, who had Chuck Schumer said this would be a clean debt ceiling, we would just raise it. That's not the case. You've got work requirements to help people out of poverty into jobs. You've got reforms that we can build things, cut the red tape. We capped so the president can't just spend money wildly. We're actually spending less than we spent last year. That hasn't happened in Congress. So maybe it doesn't do everything for everyone, but this is a step in the right direction that no one thought we would be at today.
Let's talk about work requirements, because you all have said it was sort of a red line. Congressman Garrett Graves, one of your top negotiators on this, when he was asked Friday if you guys were going to back off on that, he said, quote, hell no. But the White House, again, that's an area where they're celebrating. They say there are no changes to Medicaid. You referenced SNAP and TANF. And so basically SNAP includes an expansion for veterans and people who are homeless. So there's an expansion there to some extent for some credits. But and the changes that you did get will lift the age and the requirements and those kinds of things, but that they sunset. So they don't last for very long.
You can't tie one Congress to the next. No, they don't. They sunset after 7 years when you go forward. But let's see what the White House doesn't write in there. There's a 12% exemption for every state, and the states are using this to exempt people. We lower that to 8%. We take the age from 49 to 54, so it encompasses more people. What did we exempt? Veterans. I think that's appropriate that veterans get exempted.
Of course.
But what we're talking about...
But those are dollars. When you talk about more benefits for more people.
And you know, at the end of the day, it's saves more money, because what does a work requirement do? It's only on able-bodied people with no dependents. Instead of borrowing money from China to pay somebody to sit on the couch, we now give them the process to go get a job. Every study has shown when you do that, it puts more people to work. And when they work, what happens? More people are paying into Social Security and Medicare. You will see at the end of the day, this puts our economy stronger, less dependent on China. We cut money, so we stop the inflation the Democrats are doing. This is a tough position because the Democrats have spent so much, made it so easier for people to not go back to work, and we just changed the course, shrunk the ability for exemptions on the percentage, and now are going to provide people more jobs.
Okay, let's talk about the IRS, because there had been talk of trying to scale back some of the $80 billion. Congressman Dan Bishop also tweeting on this. He says one of the $80 billion Democrats appropriated, of the $80 billion appropriated to the IRS over 10 years, the deal rescinds only $1.9 billion. You read that right. That's the kind of get that's so good. McCarthy agreed to increase the debt ceiling $4 trillion.
Yeah, let's have the full explanation. Do you know how much they're going to spend this year for IRS agents? $1.9 billion. So we repealed every single dollar they were going to use for IRS agents. So they hired zero. So I have to come back next year. So I don't get all of it repealed, but they have none for this year. I don't understand if you stopped all the hiring of any IRS agents, that is not a win in his eyes. So I'm not quite sure.
Do you have negotiating room though next year?
I'm sorry.
Do you have negotiating room though next year if this deal is still in place? I mean, what kind of negotiations are the Democrats going to want to engage in?
Well, we have the majority. We can govern and engage in anything they want to engage in. But what we have found, since we've taken the majority, we changed this country. We opened the House back up. We not only have we repealed the IRS agents they're going to have today, we put in work requirements. We're now spending less money, the first Congress to do that in a Congress before. We've now capped the president that he can't just go spend $1.5 trillion. We've made fully fund our military and our veterans, but the non-defense level goes back to 22 levels, even below that. Think about that. We don't control the Senate. We don't control the presidency. So compare us to when we controlled all three. We didn't do any of that. We spent more money. It's a new day. It's a new Congress. And it's a new Republican majority.
So the Washington Post, writing about this yesterday, said this about what's ultimately in the deal. They said the White House agreed to an inflation-adjusted reduction in direct spending on discretionary programs, but one that will be mitigated by redirecting funds from other areas, such as the money clawed back from Internal Revenue Service expansion. Spending on these programs will rise by 1% in 2025 under the deal. There's a question about whether a lot of this is just a wash, if they're just moving money from one place to another.
Let's think about this. The president increases by $6 trillion. We have always said we're going to call back money, and then we're going to let government only grow at 1%. Why? Because it's been growing at 33% with the Democrats on discretionary spending. The president said we could only look at about 14% of the entire budget to get this done. We've been able to achieve that in this short time frame. But think about what else we repealed. This is the largest rescission in American history. You can add up all the rescissions from all the other Congress. This is greater. And what are we pulling back? CDC's Global Health Fund. So no longer are we sending $400 million of American taxpayers' money to China. We continue to pull that back. That is a victory for the American public, and I'll debate this bill with anybody, because at the end of the day, is it everything I wanted? No, but we don't control all of it. But it is the biggest rescission in history. It is the biggest cut in Congress has ever voted in that process, and you know what? We've been able to do it by making the economy even stronger, by putting work requirements in to put people back to work, and then streamline NEPA that hasn't been done in 40 years. We're going to cut the red tape. So if you want to build a road, if you want to put renewable energy, you want to have our energy become energy independent, you now have it streamlined and an opportunity with a time frame for review instead of 7 years to 1.
I want to ask you about student debt relief, because I'm hearing two different stories from what is in here and what's not. So you all have said that the pause on student debt repayments is going to lift. Is that my understanding? So that they'll come back. But the White House says this: the budget agreement keeps in place the president's plan to provide student debt relief for hardworking borrowers recovering from a once-in-a-generation pandemic. They make it sound as if their program's not going to change at all. Of course, we're waiting on the Supreme Court to decide on this.
Okay, but don't confuse the two. What the president did, he went unconstitutionally and said he was going to waive certain people part of their debt for student loan, but then he paused everybody's student loan. So everybody who borrowed a student loan within 60 days of the signing is going to have to pay that back.
So you're both getting something on that
The
front.
Supreme Court is taking up that case. But if the Supreme Court came back and said that was unconstitutional, the president could still say he's pausing, not waiving it. But now that this is in law, the Supreme Court decision will have to be upheld, that they would have to pay.
So the pause is gone.
The pause is gone
Okay.
within 60 days of this being signed.
Okay, so
that is another victory because that brings in $5 billion each month to the American public.
Have you talked to Minority Leader Jeffries? Because I know that you've tried to build a relationship there. It sounds like he's going to have to bring Democrat votes to the table because you've got at least a couple dozen who say that they're not. What's your conversation like with him about how you guys get this across the finish line?
I know when I became Speaker, I wanted Congress to work differently. So I wanted to treat Hakeem the way I wanted to be treated. So I talk to Hakeem every single week. We could disagree about things, but I just want him to know what we're working on. Everything doesn't have to be political. But in every time that there is an agreement and a negotiation between the president and Congress, both parties, when they have an agreement, come together and vote for the bill because both of them talk about it. I don't work with Hakeem to say, oh, I need these many votes. I think you're going to get a majority of Republicans voting for this bill. This is a good bill for the American public. The president agreed with this bill, so I think there's going to be a lot of Democrats that go vote for it too. Right now, the Democrats are very upset. The one thing Hakeem told me, there's nothing in the bill for them. There's not one thing in the bill for Democrats.
I don't know that that's going to persuade them to join him or you on these votes
I'm
if
just
they
telling
need
what he
to.
said.
But we'll talk to one of them next. Quickly, you've talked about getting back to regular order, the 12 appropriations bills that have to be passed every year. There's kind of a carrot and stick situation in this to get people to do that. Are you worried that some of your caucus is going to be ticked about how this went down and you're not going to have their support when you need it in September for those bills?
Not at all. People underestimate me every single day and what we've been able to do. Put a border security bill, a parents' bill of rights. We lifted the debt ceiling. What we put in here and what we want to change in Washington is the Washington of old, where they wouldn't pass the appropriation bills. They do an omni bill of $1.7 trillion and send it to the House right before Christmas and have you vote on it, not wait 72 hours. That's all changed. So inside this bill is a provision. If Congress does not do their work and pass all 12 appropriation bills, a continuing resolution goes in, but it cuts 1% across the board. Give you the incentive to do the job. Have the American people actually have a say and a check and balance in here and have their consequences for the lack of action by Congress. So you know what? It's a new day in Congress. It's a new majority of these Republicans, and we're going to change the way we do businesses. We're going to spend less. We're not going to waste taxpayer money in sending it to China. We're not going to pay people to stay home. We're going to give the encouragement to go back to work. We're going to cut red tape so we could build things in America again, and we're not going to reward people in Washington that don't do the job they're supposed to do. They've got to show up and they got to do the work.
Well, we will watch as you do the work of hammering out the text this afternoon and watch for a vote later this week. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming in.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.